The laughter started with the groom Cade Mercer before it spread through the church like a plague. He was marrying the mail-order bride as a joke, a bet to prove he could get any woman to say yes. But the woman standing beside him, Hattie Whitlow, didn't cry. She didn't flinch. As the whole town mocked her, she simply held her head high and met his gaze, her quiet dignity, a stark contrast to his loud cruelty. When the preacher declared them man and wife, the joke was sealed in law, and Cade felt the first unnerving prick of a truth he wasn't ready for. He had just bound himself to a woman made of iron. The preacher couldn't even finish his words before the ranch hands started laughing. It started as a chuckle from Cade Mercer, head of the whole mess, before rippling out like wildfire through the gathered crowd. Some of them had to cover their mouths to keep from choking on it. Others didn't bother. After all, wasn't that the point? The bride didn't flinch. She stood still, fingers wrapped tight around the small bouquet of dried wildflowers. Eyes set on the man beside her, on Cade, like the rest of them didn't exist. Like the laughter wasn't echoing across the church rafters, like she hadn't noticed the preacher's mouth twisting in discomfort when she'd stepped through the door. Her name was Hattie Whitlow. She weighed more than most of the women in town put together. Her dress, sent from St. Louis, barely fit across her middle, and the boots she wore were cracked and too tight at the ankles. But she stood up straight, chin high, shoulders back, while Cade said, "I do." Like a punchline. And then it was done. Just like that, the paper signed, the preacher paid, and the crowd dismissed with whispers and nudges and bets on how long it would take before she ran off crying. She didn't. She followed Cade back to the ranch on foot, her travel trunk bouncing in the back of the wagon, her thick braid slapping gently against her back. Cade didn't say much, just rode ahead of her hat, pulled low, spitting once in the dust as if to clear the taste of the whole thing from his mouth. He hadn't wanted a wife. He wanted to shut up Clay, his loudmouthed foreman, who'd said no woman in her right mind would agree to marry Cade Mercer sight unseen. Not after the way he'd burned through half the saloon girls in 2 crows and left the preacher's niece crying into a hymn book. So Cade put out an ad. Young rancher, good land seeks hard-working wife. Room and board, fair treatment opportunity for shared prosperity. He knew the kind of woman who'd answer. Desperate ones, lonely ones, gullible ones. And he knew what kind of woman Clay was hoping for. Slim, sharp, and easily flustered. What Cade got was Hattie Whitlow. And what no one knew, not Clay, not the preacher, not even Cade himself, was that this woman wasn't just desperate, she was ready. By the time they arrived at the ranch house, the sky had turned the color of old bruises. The men were waiting, pretending to stack feed or haul fence posts, but really just waiting for a good look at the punchline Cade had hitched himself to. He didn't introduce her, didn't open the door for her either. He just walked in, kicked off his boots, and poured himself a drink, while Hattie stood on the porch, suitcase in hand, thus clinging to her hymn. She didn't wait. She pushed the door open herself. The cabin wasn't much. One room, a stove, a bed in the corner with sheets tangled from disuse. Cade figured she'd last a week, maybe 2, before writing a letter to her folks and demanding a ticket home. But she didn't cry. She unpacked. First her brushes and sewing kit, then her cookpot. Then a framed picture of a woman Cade didn't recognize. Her mother probably dead from the look of it. She cooked dinner that night quietly, efficiently. Biscuits and beans with a side of greens she'd kept wrapped in a wet cloth from her travel bag. Cade ate it without a word. She didn't ask for compliments. He didn't offer any. By morning, she'd already swept the floor, washed the basin, and mended one of his shirts. The elbow had split 2 weeks back, but he hadn't cared enough to fix it. Now it sat neatly folded on the table, with tight, clean stitches across the seam. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up like it might bite him. "Mending," she said simply. He stared at her. "I didn't ask you to do that." "You didn't have to." Cade didn't know what to do with that, so he just grunted and walked out. Clay was waiting by the barn with a grin on his face, in a question he didn't need to say out loud. "Well," he said, "how's married life?" Cade spat, "Shut up." Clay laughed. The days passed. Hattie didn't cry, didn't hide, didn't complain. She asked where the wash was kept, how often the cows needed milking, where the chickens liked to lay. She moved slow but steady, like someone who didn't believe in wasting effort. And after a while, the ranch hands stopped laughing. Not because they liked her, but because they didn't know what to make of her. She wasn't pretty. She wasn't meek. But damn if she didn't hold her ground. One morning, Cade came back from mending fence to find her kneeling in the yard with a hammer in one hand and a board in the other, fixing the warped steps that'd been splintering since spring. "You trying to rebuild the place?" he asked, arms crossed. She didn't look up, trying to keep it from falling in. Later that week, she dragged a rusted chicken coop out from behind the barn and started patching it. When Cade told her to leave it be, she asked if he'd rather buy new hens when a fox got them. And when he didn't answer, she went right on fixing. By the second month, she'd rearranged the pantry, organized the barn tools, and planted 2 rows of beans by the back fence. The ranch was running smoother, and Cade hated how much he noticed. He didn't want to see the way she rubbed her wrists at night from work, or how she sang under her breath when she cleaned. Didn't want to notice the shape of her hands or the way her braid curled at the ends. But he did. One night after a hard ride back from town, he stepped inside to find the table set simmering and Hattie asleep in the rocking chair by the stove. And he just stared at her. He didn't touch her, didn't say anything. Just stood there, hat in hand, heart doing something it hadn't done in a long time. Beat for someone who didn't ask him to earn it. But then came the letter sealed in a blue envelope with his name in crisp handwriting from St. Louis from her brother. And with it, a story Cade wasn't ready to hear. A story that could burn the whole damn ranch to the ground. The envelope was heavier than it should have been. Blue clean, not a speck of dust on it. Cade turned it over in his hands twice before opening it, as if maybe he could change what it said just by stalling. But the words were already written. He sat at the edge of the porch with the letter resting on his knee, the late afternoon sun slicing through the slats of the railing. From inside, Hattie hummed a soft tune while she stirred something on the stove. The sound grated now not because it was unpleasant, but because it was so calm, so steady, and Kay didn't feel either of those things. The handwriting was clean, precise, a man who hadn't spent much of his life in the dirt. To Mr. Cade Mercer, I hope this letter finds you well, though I admit my reasons for writing are not entirely polite. Cad's mouth tightened. My sister Hattie has informed me she married you upon arriving in 2 Crows. She wrote kindly of the arrangement, perhaps too kindly. You should know she is not a woman accustomed to lies or to cruelty disguised as jokes. She chose to leave St. Louis because she was tired of being stared at like furniture and spoken to like a burden. She trusted you. I trust she has reason to. But I know men like you. I know the kind of things they think when they look at someone like my sister. So let me say this clearly. If I find out you've treated her with anything less than respect, I will come to your ranch and gut you like a trout. There was no signature, just a final sentence underlined once in heavy ink. She may be soft, but she was raised in iron. Cade folded the letter, fully set it down, and stared out across the yard. The chickens pecked in lazy half circles by the coop. A windmill creaked in the distance, and inside Hattie sang. He didn't tell her about the letter. He couldn't not when he didn't know what to say. She had already done more than he'd expected, worked harder than he had, and it made something inside him tighten every time he looked at her. Like he'd kicked a dog and now it followed him. Not because it forgot the boot, but because it believed he could be better. 2 nights later, Clay showed up late, smelling of sweat and cheap tobacco. Fenced down by the southern creek, he grunted. Storm's coming, too real one. Cade nodded, grabbed his coat. Hattie stood by the doorway, lamp in hand. I'll keep the fire going, she said, in case you're out late. Her eyes lingered on his for a second too long, and Cade looked away first. He didn't say thank you, didn't promise to be safe, just turned and rode into the dark. The fence wasn't the only thing broken. By the time they reached the creek bed, it was clear a bear had torn through the lower stretch, knocking rails down and tearing into the posts. Clay whistled low. Damn thing's getting bolder, he muttered. We'll fix it at first light. Cade said double wire. Maybe set a trap. They camped there that night. Rain didn't fall, but the sky boiled heavy with it. The smell of thunder hanging like iron. Clay drank from a tin flask and leaned against his saddle. She don't seem like the kind to run, he said after a while. Cade looked over. Hattie, what about her? Clay shrugged. Just saying. Most gals would have hightailed it back east by now, but not her. She stays, works, listens. You ain't exactly given her a reason to smile, but she keeps doing it anyhow. Cade said nothing. Clay smirked. Makes a man wonder. Wonder what if maybe the joke's on you. Cade lay back against his bedroll and stared at the sky. He dreamed of a woman with soft hands and a spine of iron humming songs in a cabin that didn't feel empty anymore. When he woke, the rain had come. They worked the fence in silence, hands stiff with cold. By the time Cade returned home soaked and sore, the cabin windows glowed like beacons. And when he stepped inside, the heat hit him like a blessing. Hattie didn't speak. She just handed him a dry shirt, pulled a blanket off the hook, and draped it across his shoulders without a word, and something broke loose in his chest. He caught her wrist before she could step away. She froze, looked up at him. "I'm sorry," he said quietly, her brows knit. "For what? For all of it." She didn't pull her hand away, didn't move at all. Cad's voice dropped. "I married you as a joke." She didn't blink. "I didn't think you'd come. And when you did, I figured it did last a week. But you stayed. You fixed things. You," he swallowed hard, "you made this place better. You made me better. And I don't deserve it." Hattie stared at him for a long moment. Then she said, soft as snow, "Do you want me to leave? No. Then let me stay." And that was that. No kiss, no grand confession, just a silence between them that held more meaning than either could say. Spring came. The ranch changed. So did Cade. He stopped taking meals alone, started asking her opinion on things. He built her a bench by the window where she liked to sew, bought her a new pot for the stove, fixed the leaky roof. He didn't say the word love, but he didn't have to. Not yet. Until the stranger rode in. Dust-covered tall hat pulled low. He tied off his horse outside the fence and walked straight toward the cabin boots, silent in the hard-packed dirt. Hattie was outside hanging linens. She turned when she heard his steps and froze. The stranger stopped 6 feet from her. "Hello, sister." Cade stepped onto the porch just in time to see her drop the sheet in her hand. The sheet lay crumpled in the dust. Hattie didn't move, didn't breathe. For the first time since arriving in Two Crows, her spine wasn't straight. Her eyes weren't calm. She looked smaller somehow, pulled back, as if the very sight of him had wrapped invisible cords around her body and started tightening. Cade had never seen her like that. The man Hattie's brother Cade could only assume didn't smile, didn't tip his hat. He just stood there, hands at his sides, eyes scanning Cade like he was weighing him against something he already knew he wouldn't like. "You're a hard woman to write to," the man said, still not looking at her. "Letters unanswered, rumors thick. Took me 2 months to figure out where you'd gone." Hattie found her voice. "You shouldn't be here." The man's jaw clenched. "I sent that letter to warn him. Thought that'd be enough." Cade took a step down from the porch, his boots hitting the ground with purpose. "You sent that letter." The man's eyes flicked to him. "You got a problem with it?" "No," Cade said, voice low. "But I got a problem with how you're talking to her. She's my sister. She's my wife." The man's mouth twitched like he wasn't sure if he should laugh or swing. "Convenient," he said. "But I know what this was. I've seen men like you grin over cards and talk about the stupid things women will do for a train ticket west." "Then you don't know me," Cade snapped. "I know enough. Clearly you don't. If you did, you'd be thanking her for surviving me." That stunned him. For half a second, the edge dropped from the man's posture. He looked to Hattie, something breaking behind his eyes. But she wasn't watching him. She was watching Cade. And Cade, for the first time in weeks, didn't look away. "I treated her like dirt," Cade said, voice tightening. "Made her the punchline of my own joke. And still she stayed, worked, bled, held this place together when I couldn't even hold a damn hammer. So if you came here to scare me off, you're late. She's already stronger than me." The silence that followed stretched long. Then finally the stranger let out a breath and nodded once, like he'd come expecting a fight and wasn't sure what to do with an apology. "My name's Eli," he said. "Eli Whitlow." Cade nodded slowly. "Cade Mercer." Eli's eyes dropped to the dust where the sheet still lay. He bent, picked it up, handed it to Hattie without a word. She took it slowly, hands trembling. "I came to take you home," Eli said. "But maybe you already are." Hattie stared at him for a long time, then shook her head. "No, not yet." Cade blinked. "Not yet." "I'm not done here," she said. "Not with you. Not with this land. Not with who I'm becoming." Eli's jaw flexed, but he didn't argue. Instead, he simply nodded once more and turned back toward his horse. But before he mounted, he paused. If he ever forgets what he just said, Eli called back to her. You write me. I'll come back and I won't come to talk. Then he rode off. Hattie stood still for a long time after he was gone. Then she folded the sheet and turned to go inside. Cade caught her wrist. I meant it, he said. All of it. She didn't speak, but she nodded. That night the wind picked up again. A late storm sweeping through the valley, rattling windows and sending dust skittering across the yard. Hattie stayed up late mending again. Cade watched her from the table, cup of coffee cooling in his hands. I've been thinking, he said quietly. She looked up about the ranch expanding. You've already done so much. Thought maybe you want to put your name on the deed, co-owner. Hattie froze. Then you sure? Cade nodded. You run it better than I do. She didn't smile, but her hands stilled, her eyes softened, and she said, all right. 3 weeks passed. The ranch ran smoother than it ever had until the banker arrived. His name was Reuben Marlowe, and he wore his suit like armor, dust-free, pressed with a gold pocket watch that ticked louder than his voice. Mr. Mercer, he said, tipping his hat with 2 fingers, time to talk about your debt. Cade felt his stomach twist. We settled that. Marlowe smiled like a snake. Interest's a cruel thing. Land values shift. And according to the papers, your late father didn't exactly die with his books in order. Cad's hands clenched. How much more than you've got in this house? Marlowe said simply. But I'm a reasonable man. You've built something here. I see that. And I've got an offer. Cade didn't like the way he said that. Marlowe turned toward Hattie, who stood in the doorway, expression unreadable. You've made quite the impression, Mrs. Mercer, Marlowe said. Town talks about you like a miracle. Quiet girl from the East builds a ranch up with her bare hands. Folks love that. Hattie said nothing. Marlowe smiled wider. There's a restaurant in town looking for new investors. A proper place, clean, civilized. They're looking for someone to front it, someone respectable, womanly. You'd fit the bill. I'm a rancher, Hattie said flatly. You're a story, Marlowe corrected. And stories make money. Cade stepped forward. She's not for sale. Neither is the ranch, Hattie added. Marlowe's eyes sharpened. Then I'll expect payment in 30 days. And just like that, he left. Cade stared after him, fists clenched. But Hattie, she didn't look shaken. She looked like someone waking up. I need to go to town, she said. What for? She didn't answer. The next day she dressed in her Sunday best, pinned her hair up tight, and hitched the wagon herself. Cade tried to argue. She didn't let him. He stood on the porch watching her go, heart thoo-tooing like a war drum in his chest. He wasn't sure if she'd come back, but when she did 3 days later, everything changed. She'd found work. More than that, she'd found allies. Women in town who remembered her kindness, who'd seen the way she carried herself, who whispered about her strength behind closed doors. And when she asked for help, they gave it. Hattie returned with books, ledgers, and promises. She was going to save the ranch. Not for Cade, for herself. Cade had never seen her like this. Hattie sat at the kitchen table, sleeves rolled to her elbows, surrounded by ledgers and papers, and unfamiliar terms scribbled in 3 different hands. She was moving fast, eyes darting across numbers, lips muttering under her breath as she cross-checked columns with a pencil she kept sharpened to a needlepoint. There was a fire under her that hadn't been there before. Not just in her eyes, but in the way she moved, certain, focused, relentless. Where'd you learn to do all this? Cade asked quietly, hovering near the doorway like a boy in trouble. Hattie didn't look up. School. She said, flipping a page. Before everything else, I was a bookkeeper briefly. He blinked. You never said. You never asked. The words weren't cruel. They weren't even sharp. Just true. Cade looked down at the floorboards, a swell of guilt washing over him. That's what this whole season had been, really a reckoning. Every day he uncovered another corner of her he hadn't bothered to look at before. And every time he came up short. She stood suddenly and crossed to the stove, poured herself some coffee. Black, no sugar, then returned without a glance. How bad is it? He asked. She sighed. The banker is just not bluffing. Your father owed more than just Marlowe. He borrowed against the cattle, the land, even the water rights. This place was held together with string and spit. You just didn't see it until now. And we can't pay it. Not unless we sell something. He frowned the herd. No, she said firmly. That's income. It's the only thing keeping us afloat. But there's something else. He didn't like the tone in her voice. What Hattie tapped the map spread across the table, her finger landing on a shaded corner of the property line. Northfield, you said it's useless rocky dry, but Marlowe wants it. That means it's worth more than you think. Cade nodded slowly. Water. Likely or something else he's hoping to flip. We find out what it is, we find leverage. He stared at her, dared, something strange catching in his throat. You're really not going to leave, are you? Hattie looked at him then. Really looked. Her expression wasn't soft, but it wasn't cold either. I didn't come here to leave. Something cracked open in Cad's chest. I'm sorry, he said. I know. I mean it. She studied him for a long time, then finally nodded once. I know. They rode out to the Northfield 2 days later. The land was as dry and useless as he remembered. But Hattie brought with her a compass, a folded map, and 2 canteens, and she walked the edges like a woman hunting for ghosts. Cade followed. At some point she knelt and started digging with her hands. Just a few inches down, the dirt turned gray, then damp. She sniffed it, tasted it, then smiled. Sulfur, she said. There's water down there. He raised an eyebrow. You a geologist now, too? She smirked. No, but I remember what good land smells like. They marked the spot. By nightfall, Cade was back at the ranch, sketching a letter. He didn't have many allies in town, but he did know a man who drilled wells. Old Garrett, a cranky prospector who owed Cad's father a favor. Hattie mailed it the next day. Then the waiting began. But while they waited, something shifted. Cade started seeing her in ways he never had before. The way she held herself when talking to the ranch hands. The way she kept her cool when a storm broke the fence and scattered the cattle across 2 hills. The way she didn't flinch when he snapped, but also didn't back down. She was still but not cold. She laughed now and then, soft but real. She sang sometimes when she thought no one was listening. Off-key low, always the same song. Cade didn't know the words, but it stuck with him all the same. One night they were sitting by the fire when he said it. You know, I used to think I was doing you a favor marrying you. She didn't blink. I know, but you were the one doing me a favor, and I was too stupid to see it. She turned to look at him. Cade swallowed. I didn't know how to care about anyone, not really. And then you came along and just showed me. Her voice was soft. You didn't make it easy. No, he agreed. But you didn't run. I thought about it. He laughed, I bet. A beat passed. Then why didn't you? She didn't answer right away. Then she said, because you needed saving too. He looked at her, and for the first time since they'd met, she led him. No mask, no caution. Just her, and he realized then he hadn't just fallen in love. He'd been rescued. The well driller arrived 3 days later, reeking of sweat and pipe smoke. Didn't think you'd cash in that favor, Garrett grunted, jumping down from his wagon. At least not for dirt. It's not dirt, Cade said, helping him unload. Garrett grumbled. We'll see. They drilled for 3 days straight. On the 4th day, water shot 10 FT into the air. Garrett whooped like a madman. Hot damn, you hit a vein. Hattie smiled, but there was no joy in it, just fierce relief. They filed the claim with the county office the next morning, and when Marlowe returned, slick and smug, he found the land already staked, surveyed, and appraised. You found water? He asked, stunned. Plenty, Cade said. Marlowe tried to play it cool. Well, that changes things. Perhaps we can come to a new agreement. No need, Hattie said, stepping forward. We already paid the debt. He blinked to hell. Cade tossed a stack of bills onto the table. The land's worth more than you thought. We sold rights to a bottling company in Denver. Got more than enough to clear the books. Marlowe went pale. Hattie leaned forward. You can go now. And he did. But the story didn't end there. Because Two Crows wasn't used to a woman like Hattie Mercer. The town had seen her arrive overweight, quiet, dressed in outdated clothes, and they'd whispered behind her back. But now they watched her differently. When she walked through town, people stepped aside. When she spoke, they listened. And when the town council opened a seat for public leadership, she was nominated. Cade didn't even know until the paper arrived at breakfast. You going to do it? He asked. Hattie looked at the notice, then at him. I haven't decided. You should. She raised an eyebrow. You don't think people will laugh? He met her gaze. Let em. They laughed at us before. Look how that turned out. She smiled then. Really smiled. And Cade thought, not for the first time, that maybe the joke had been on him all along. Two Crows hadn't seen a summer like this in years. The well Hattie uncovered didn't just save the Mercer Ranch, it lit a fuse. Within weeks, word had spread of the underground water vein stretching beneath the Northfield. A Denver bottling company sent men in suits and boots to negotiate rights. By July, the first shipment of water barrels left Mercer land in branded crates. The ranch, once days from foreclosure, was profitable again. But that wasn't what changed everything. It was her. Hattie. She'd become something else entirely. In the town square, folks whispered when she passed, then quickly straightened up when she looked their way. Ranchers who once mocked her behind closed doors now tipped their hats. Shopkeepers asked her opinion on taxes, land use, and church donations. Widows asked her to speak at fundraisers. Even the town reverend who once refused to look her in the eye asked her to read scripture one Sunday. And Cade watched all of it with a mix of pride and something else he couldn't name. She had come to him as a punchline, a cruel joke wrapped in soft skin and two small boots. And now she stood at the center of a town full of men who underestimated her. Her chin high, her voice steady, her back straight. He wasn't the same man either. He, deep into drinking altogether, sold off the saloon shares his father left behind and used the money to fix the barn and hire 2 new ranch hands. He worked the land with his own hands. Now every day, side by side with Hattie, and each night after dinner they sat on the porch and watched the wind stir the grass, quiet and close. But not everything healed with time. One morning, Cade found Hattie in the sewing room. She was sitting in silence, her fingers resting on a stack of letters. They were yellowed, tied with string. He recognized them instantly. The letters he'd written to her when he first placed the ad back when he'd only wanted a name on a certificate and a body in a house. They weren't cruel exactly, just cold, transactional, and dishonest. He walked in slowly. I didn't know you kept those. She didn't look up. I read them sometimes just to remind myself of what. She finally met his eyes, of how far we've come. Cade sat beside her. I can't take back the way I brought you here. I was a damn fool. Yes, she said simply. I didn't deserve what you gave me. No, she said again. He smiled faintly. You're not going to make this easy, are you? Her mouth twitched. Would you believe me if I did? He reached for her hand. I mean it, Hattie. I love you. Her breath hitched. She looked at him for a long time, searching his face for a lie. She didn't find one. Then quietly, say it again. I love you. She leaned forward and kissed him. Slow, steady, certain. That night, for the first time since their wedding, she didn't sleep in the guest room. But the calm didn't last. Late August brought more than heat. It brought Marlowe back. This time not in a suit, but with lawyers. He wasn't after the land now. He was after reputation. They came under the guise of an audit. Accusations of improper water rights, forged signatures, misfiled claims. Nothing stuck, but it didn't have to. The mess alone threatened to unravel everything. Hattie met them heading. She marched into the county clerk's office with documents in hand, her voice echoing off the high ceilings, rattling the men who once dismissed her. She pointed out every loophole, every falsified line, every error in Marlowe's complaint. By the time she left, his lawyers looked ready to bolt. But the attack had done its damage. The bottling company pulled back temporarily. Town whispers resumed. Maybe she forged those papers. Couldn't have found that water on her own. Thinking she's too big for her boots now. They didn't say it to her face, but she heard them just the same. It came to a head at the town fair. She'd been invited to speak in honor, usually reserved for men of rank or pastors. But when she stepped up to the podium, someone in the crowd booed. Then another. A third voice called out, "Go home, may Lord her mama." The words hung in the air like smoke. Cade stepped forward, rage on his face, but Hattie raised a hand. She didn't shout, she didn't cry. She looked out at the crowd with steady eyes and said, "You don't have to like me. You don't even have to respect me, but you will tell the truth." A hush fell. I didn't steal this land. I didn't trick anyone. I worked. I saved the ranch your town owes half its water to. And I married a man who thought I was a joke, but I stood by him, forgave him, and now he stands by me. She looked toward Cade, then back at the crowd. You don't have to clap, just get out of the way. Then she stepped down. The silence held until a slow clap broke it. Sheriff Evans, then Mrs. Darnell, the baker's wife, then Thomas, the ranch hand, and soon half the crowd was clapping. Not cheering, but clapping firm and quiet. The kind of sound that meant more than noise. The other half, they just looked ashamed. 2 days later, Kate found Hattie in the field. She was sitting near the well arms wrapped around her knees, staring out into the hills. He sat beside her without a word. They didn't speak for a long time. Then she said, "They'll always see me the way I looked when I arrived." He shook his head. "No, Hattie. They'll see you how you taught them to see you." She didn't answer, but she leaned against him. And for a long time, they watched the wind move through the grass together. By September, the town had shifted again. The county confirmed Hattie's land rights. The bottling contract resumed, and 2 Crows named her to the town council by majority vote. The woman they'd once snickered at behind her back now helped set policy on taxes, land distribution, and infrastructure. But Hattie never moved into politics fully. She kept working the ranch, kept her old dresses, kept the chickens fed, the accounts balanced, and the fences mended. She still walked with her shoulders slightly curled, not out of shame, but because she never liked drawing attention to herself. She didn't need it. She had power now. Not the kind that shouts, the kind that stays. And Cade. He still woke up every morning stunned by the woman beside him. Still found himself watching her when she wasn't looking. Still thought about the day she arrived in that too-tight dress and secondhand shoes, clutching her bag like a shield. That woman was still in there, but she'd become so much more. One evening he brought out a new dress box. Had he raised an eyebrow? "What's this? Open it." Inside was a blue silk dress, fine, fitted, gorgeous. She stared at it. "It's beautiful," she said softly. "You are," he replied. She ran her fingers over the fabric, but her face twisted slightly. I don't need dresses like this." "I know," he said. "That's why I got it. Not because you need it, but because you deserve it." Her lip trembled. She stepped into his arms and held him tight. And that night they danced barefoot on the porch under a sky full of stars. But the past wasn't done with them yet. 2 nights later, a letter arrived addressed to Mrs. Hattie Mercer. She opened it at the breakfast table, brow furrowing as she read. Then her face drained of color. Cade leaned in. "What is it?" She didn't speak. He took the letter from her gently. It was from Ohio, from a man claiming to be her brother. She hadn't spoken of family not once, but now here it was ink on paper. He was coming in 2 weeks, and he was bringing their mother. The day the letter arrived, Hattie didn't speak again until sundown. Not over lunch, not while she mended the fence by the east pasture. Not when Cade rode alongside her to check the cattle pens. Her silence wasn't cold, just heavy-weighted with something older than the plains, older than the hills, older than the land she'd made hers. Cade didn't press, but he watched her from the porch as she lit the lanterns in the barn. Her hands moving in that same steady rhythm she always used when her world was trying to spin out beneath her. He knew she wouldn't hide it from him. But he also knew whatever was coming in 2 weeks had already been with her for years. That night after the house had gone still, she slipped into their bedroom and stood by the window. "His name is Josiah," she said. Finally, Cade sat up. "Your brother," she nodded. "Is that good?" he asked gently. She didn't answer right away, just stared out into the dark. "When we were kids, we used to dig holes behind the churchyard," she said. "Pretend we were building tunnels to China. I always thought if we dug deep enough, we'd get away from there." Cade waited. "We didn't talk after I left. He wrote once, said I'd shame the family." Cade stood and walked to her, placing his hands on her arms. "Then why's he coming now?" He said, "Mama's sick, doesn't have long." Her voice was flat. "Wants to see me, wants to set things right." "Do you?" She didn't answer, but her shoulders curled inward. It was the first time he'd seen her small in months. Not fragile, just wounded. He didn't press, just stepped forward and pulled her against his chest. "You're not that girl anymore," he whispered. "You don't owe them a thing." She didn't cry, but her hand gripped his shirt like a rope in storm water. The days ticked down. 10, 8. The ranch moved forward as always, chickens fed fences, check barrels loaded and sent to town. But the wind changed. At night, Hattie's hands trembled when she thought no one was looking. Once Cade found her, kneeling in the field by the well lips, moving silently, fingers clenched in the grass. She wasn't praying, she was remembering, and it was tearing through her like wildfire. He finally asked her 3 days before the family was set to arrive. "What happened, Hattie?" She didn't pretend not to know what he meant. She sat at the edge of the bed and folded her hands. "When I was 16, the pastor's son cornered me behind the storage shed. She said, told me I was meant for a life of quiet obedience, that no man would want me unless I was grateful that the Lord made women like me soft for a reason." Cad's jaw clenched. "I hit him with a milk pail," she said quietly. "Split his lip. Didn't even think. Just did it. Told him if he touched me again, I'd feed him to the pigs." Cade tried to smile, but it broke too fast. "They told my parents I'd seduced him, that I was a liar, a shame, a burden. My mama wouldn't look at me for a year. Josiah told the neighbors I had demons. Said it was the fat. It made me sick in the head." Her voice cracked for the first time. "They made me sleep in the barn, made me beg for forgiveness. Every Sunday. I left that winter with frostbite on 2 toes. Cade knelt in front of her, took her hands. "Say the word," he said, "and I'll send them packing the minute their boots hit this ranch." But Hattie shook her head. "No," she said. "They'll see what I built. They'll see who I became, and they'll leave knowing I didn't need them." She pulled in a slow breath. "And if that doesn't happen," she added, "then I'll bury them under the east field." Cade chuckled, even though his eyes were glassy. He kissed her knuckles. And then he said the only thing she needed to hear. "Whatever happens, you won't face it alone." They arrived at noon on the 14th. A rickety stagecoach kicked up dust all the way from the road, the kind that never cleared until long after the wheels had stopped turning. Josiah stepped down first, tall, thin, angular, the kind of man who always looked like he was about to scold someone. His suit was dusty, but his shoes were polished. The woman he helped down next moved like a wraith. Gray shawl, bonnet, hollow eyes that scanned the ranch like it owed her something. Hattie didn't flinch. She stepped off the porch with her shoulders back and her voice steady. "Hello, Josiah." He gave a polite nod. Sister, their mother, said nothing. Cade stepped up beside his wife, arm brushing hers. "This is Cade Mercer," Hattie said. "My husband. This is our land." Josiah looked around with a thin smile. "Bigger than I pictured. Stronger than I pictured," Hattie replied. He raised an eyebrow. Cade stepped forward. "We've got lunch ready." The meal was tense. Hattie had cooked roast chicken, cornbread, green beans, and fresh peach pie. Their mother didn't touch her plate. Josiah picked at his food and glanced around like he was expecting a trap door to open, so he said at last, "You made a life for yourself out here." Hattie took a sip of tea. "I did. Water rights bottling contracts. Councilwoman impressive." Cade narrowed his eyes. "What's your point?" Josiah smiled thinly. "Just that it must be nice building your name off the back of someone else." Hattie stiffened. "What do you mean?" He leaned back. "This ranch, it belonged to Cad's father, did it?" Not Cade started to rise, but Hattie grabbed his hand. "Sit," she whispered. She turned back to Josiah. "You came here to insult me. I came here to give Mama peace before she passes." Their mother still hadn't spoken. Her hand twitched slightly, but her mouth stayed closed. Josiah stood and walked to the window. "You know," he said, "they wanted to marry you off to Pastor Witt's boy. You ruined that. Ran away instead. Disgraced us." "I saved myself," Hattie said. "You ran. I survived." Josiah turned face flushed. "You abandoned us. I escaped you." Cade stood this time. "You've said enough," he snapped. "We open our home. Show some damn respect." Josiah smirked. Of course wouldn't want to offend the lady of the house. He turned to leave, but their mother stood suddenly. Her voice, when it came, was cracked but sharp. "Enough." Everyone froze. She turned to Hattie, her eyes gray and glassy, locked with her daughter's. "I was cruel," she said. Even Josiah blinked. "I let them shame you. Let the church tell me you were wrong. But you were, I see it now." She stepped closer. Her frame frail as cornstalks. "I should have protected you." Hattie stared at her, breath caught. "I don't expect forgiveness," the older woman said, "but I needed you to hear it." She reached into her pocket and placed a locket on the table. Inside was a photo of Hattie, aged 10, smiling. Then she turned and walked to the door. Josiah looked stunned. Mother. She didn't respond, just kept walking until the dust swallowed her. Josiah lingered, then looked at Hattie. You think you've won? I didn't come here to win, she said. I came to live. And then quietly, don't come back. Josiah hesitated, then followed his mother into the dusk. That night Hattie didn't speak for a while. Cade built a fire, poured her a glass of wine. Finally she looked up. They're gone, she whispered. They are. Her voice shook. I waited so long for them to love me. He walked over and knelt beside her. You don't need their love, Hattie. You've got mine. And finally she broke, not with sobs but with long quiet tears that had waited a lifetime. Cade pulled her into his arms and held her as the fire cracked and the wind swept over the hills. After Josiah and their mother vanished into the dust, it was as if the ground itself sighed beneath Hattie's boots. The weight she had carried since childhood, the one Cade had seen in her shoulders, in her silences, in her dreams, where she'd wake gasping, didn't leave all at once. But something shifted, something crucial, and yet life on the ranch didn't wait for catharsis. The following morning, Cade found her in the east barn sleeves, rolled a coil of rope in one hand, saddle in the other. You sleep at all? He asked. Like a dead mule, she replied with a crooked smile, but then she paused. No dreams, first time in years. Cade leaned against the doorframe. You planning to tell me where you're headed, or am I chasing you all morning? She tossed the rope into the back of the wagon and wiped her brow. There's a woman in Copper Ridge, she said. Lucilo Granger, widow, got 4 kids and no land of her own. Works the laundry for pennies. They say her youngest ain't walked in a year. He raised an eyebrow. And I've got 6 acres behind the creek that go untouched, Hattie said. I'm giving her 3. She'll tend and better than weeds. Cade blinked. You're just giving away land now. She looked at him, eyes steady, chin firm. I know what it's like to need a beginning or a second one. He crossed the room, took her hand. You're something else, he murmured. She raised an eyebrow. You say that like it's news. Over the following weeks, the ranch transformed, not in appearance, but in spirit. Lucille Granger and her children moved into the old bunkhouse. Her oldest, Thomas, took to fencing like a natural. Her middle daughter, Me, began writing the books Hattie never had time for, keeping ledgers, sketching out rotation schedules for the crops. The youngest, Annie, clung to Hattie's skirts like a second shadow, eyes wide and wondering. Hattie never once complained. In fact, she started smiling more, and folks in town noticed. At the general store, the whispers shifted from mockery to curiosity, from curiosity to quiet admiration. Did you hear she donated a dozen hens to the new orphanage? I heard she fixed old man Ellis's roof herself after the storm. She's not what I thought. One woman confessed to Cade at the post office. Not by half. Cade only smiled. He knew what they were seeing was only the surface. What lay beneath was even fiercer, but not everyone welcomed the change. One afternoon, as Cade and Hattie walked back from the fields, they spotted a man waiting by the porch. He wore city boots polished too clean for dirt roads. His suit was tailored. His smile was, Mr. and Mrs. Mercer, he asked, tipping his hat. Cade's shoulders tensed. That's us. The man produced a folder. Name's Miles Thatcher. I represent Midland Development. Cade glanced at Hattie. Her face had gone still. We're expanding, Thatcher said smoothly. Looking to build a freight station right through this region. Word is you own the North Ridge. Hattie didn't blink. We do. We'd like to buy it. No, he blinked. I haven't even named the price. You don't need to. Thatcher stepped forward, voice calm. Mrs. Mercer, this land could fetch you more than a decade's worth of crops. Enough to live easy, enough to grow. We're already growing. His tone turned colder. You'd be wise to reconsider. Cade stepped forward. You threatening my wife? Thatcher smiled. Not at all. Just making sure you understand the offer won't stand forever. Hattie narrowed her eyes. Neither will this porch. Thatcher lingered a moment longer, then tipped his hat again and left. Cade watched him go jaw tight. What do you think? He asked. Hattie watched the dust settle where Thatcher's boots had been. I think men like that always come knocking when a woman's just about to bloom. 3 nights later, the barn caught fire. Lucille screamed first. Cade leapt from bed, half-dressed. The smell of smoke hit like a blow. Hattie was already sprinting across the field barefoot, shouting for water. Buckets flew. Hands passed them in a blur. It was the west wing where they kept the hay. It burned fastest. They worked until dawn. By the time the flames died, half the structure was gone. So were two colts. Lucille wept beside the charred frame, her arms around Annie. Cade turned to Hattie. "You think that man? I know it was him," she growled. "Or someone he sent." They didn't have proof, but they didn't need it. The threat had spoken in flame. Hattie didn't wait. The next morning she hitched the wagon and headed for town. She marched straight into the council office. Boots scuffed, hair tied back, eyes blazing. Mayor Landry blinked as she strode in. "Mrs. Mercer, I want protection," she said flatly. "I want patrols. I want to watch on my land." "Surely you don't think. I know who's behind it, but I won't waste time proving what you already suspect. Either you act, or I'll put posters up myself. Tell the town who let a woman's ranch burn, because freight lines pay better than families." Landry swallowed hard. He nodded, and within 2 days a deputy was posted at the ranch edge. Thatcher didn't return, but his shadow lingered. For a while things settled. Me started a school under the oak tree, teaching the neighboring ranch kids with chalk on flat stones. Lucille's garden bloomed faster than Hattie thought possible. Cade finished rebuilding the barn stronger than before, but in Hattie a slow storm was brewing. She stood one night by the rebuilt paddock, staring at the fence line. "You ever feel like peace is just borrowed?" she asked. Cade walked beside her. "I think we all do," he said. She didn't answer, just looked at the moon and whispered, "I'm not done yet." 2 weeks later she ran for county commissioner. No one saw it coming. Least of all Thatcher. He returned to town that same week, all smiles and false charm. "You'll never win," he told her, cornering her outside the general store. "You're a joke, a fat, bitter housewife playing rancher." She stepped close, so close he had to lean back. "Say it again," she whispered. He blinked. "Say it again, and I'll have a crowd out here, faster than your trains ever moved." He backed off, and for the first time since he arrived, he didn't smile. Election day came fast. Too fast. Flyers went out. Hattie didn't campaign with money or promises. She campaigned with stories. She told her neighbors about the fire, the land grab, the way silence cost more than speaking up. She stood on barrels' porches and hay bales, and people listened. They listened because she was real. Not perfect, not polished, but unafraid. The night the results came in, Cade found her standing in the pasture again. He held the telegram in his hand. "Well?" she asked without turning. He unfolded it. "Read the words twice." "You won," he said. She didn't flinch. Just let out a long, quiet breath. "They voted for the loudmouth mortar bride," she said. "They voted for the woman who rebuilt a ranch from ashes." She turned to him, eyes shimmering. "They voted for me." He stepped forward, framed her face in his hands. "They're lucky to have you." She laughed once, sharp and sudden. "You're just in it for the eggs and pie." He kissed her forehead. "I'm in it for you." And that night, as the wind rustled the wheat, as Lucille sang softly to Annie in the bunkhouse, and me read aloud from a book beneath a lantern's glow, Hattie Mercer stood on her porch hand, resting on the rail eyes, scanning the land that once threatened to swallow her whole. It hadn't. She had claimed it, and it had answered her with roots fire and truth. She had been a joke. Now she was legend. The next morning the sun rose as if even it had heard the news. There was a stillness in the air, less like silence, more like anticipation, the kind of hush that settles right before something important begins. The town was already stirring by the time Hattie Mercer stepped out onto the porch. Her dress was simple brown cotton sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her hair braided down her back like rope. There was nothing polished about her. And yet when she walked into the town hall for her first day as county commissioner, people stood not because they were told to, because they wanted to. She walked past Thatcher, now seated on the far bench, his jaw tight, his hands clenched in his lap. He looked up only once. She didn't nod, didn't glance his way. She didn't have to. Some victories don't need acknowledgement. They just need permanence. For the first few weeks she was quiet. She listened to the farmers who'd been taxed dry for years, To the teachers who worked with no chalk, no slates, no books, to the widows who'd never asked for land because they'd been taught it wasn't theirs to ask for. And then slowly she began to move. The taxes on livestock transport were lowered. The schoolhouse received 2 new stoves and enough coal to last the winter. And she redrew land access ordinances so that unmarried women could apply for ownership with a single signature and no husband's name required. The changes weren't loud, but they lasted because when she moved, she did so like a river's slow, constant carving stone. One day, weeks later, Cade found her on the hill again. It had become her place, the place where she watched everything unfold. The land below stretched golden. Children ran between rows of corn. Lucille and me strung up clothes on a new line. A calf tried its first wobbly steps near the paddock. Cade stood beside her without saying a word, but she spoke anyway. "I used to think you married me to humiliate me," she said, not accusing, just remembering that you thought it'd be funny, a prank, a joke to tell your friends over whiskey. Cade didn't speak, only nodded slowly. "I've wanted to ask you more than once. Was it ever anything else?" He turned to her. "I thought I was marrying a stranger," he said. "A fat, soft-spoken woman from an ad. Thought it'd be a laugh. I was young, ugly in the ways I didn't understand yet. I won't lie." She looked at him unflinching. But he continued, "What I got was something I didn't deserve. You weren't soft. You were steel. You weren't weak. You were stronger than any man I've ever known. And you made this place." He gestured out across the fields of home. She didn't cry, not then, but her lip trembled just once. And when she finally turned to face him, she said, "I forgive you." Cade blinked, caught off guard. "You do, for being the boy who thought I was a joke," she said, "because the man standing here now loves me harder than most men ever learn how." He stepped closer. "I do, I know," she said softly, and then after a long pause she added, "You're lucky I'm not the vengeful type." He chuckled. "Oh, I'm well aware." Later that summer, a letter arrived. Official stamp, federal seal, addressed to Commissioner Hattie Mercer. She read it alone in her room, standing by the window. When Cade walked in, she was staring out at the horizon. "You okay?" he asked. She held out the letter. He read it silently, then read it again. "They want you to run for state," he said. "Higher office, bigger than this county." She nodded once. "I know." "You thinking about it?" Hattie didn't answer right away. "I came here to survive," she said. "That was it. Just to exist, to make it through winters and whispers. But then I met Lucille and me, and all the women who said no one ever listened to me before." She turned toward him. "If I leave, will they be heard?" Cade didn't try to answer. He just took her hand. "Whatever you do," he said, "do it loud." She smiled. "I only know one way." Fall came in a rush of wind and gold. The ranch grew quieter as the harvest neared its end. Me prepared to leave for the university on scholarship. Lucille opened a small bakery with the extra income they'd saved. Annie walked on her own, running from door to door, arms flapping like wings. Hattie stood taller than ever. She was still called names here and there. People whispered, but they also nodded when she passed. And in a town where she'd once been the punchline, her name now carried weight. Not fear, not all, but something better. Respect. Her campaign announcement was simple. No grand speech, no paid banners, just a letter in the paper and a line at the bottom. "I was once laughed at. I was once overlooked. But I stayed and I listened. And I will never stop fighting for those whose names are too often forgotten." And people showed up. They showed up in boots and bonnets and aprons, in school uniforms, in faded coats and Sunday dresses. They didn't cheer for a polished politician. They came for Hattie, for the woman who had walked barefoot across burning fields, who had held a crying child not her own, who had married a man who thought she was a joke and turned the joke into legend. On election night, the post office bell rang long after dark. A telegraph. Lucille sprinted to the Mercer's house barefoot, waving the slip of paper. Cade opened the door. Hattie was right behind him. Luca was crying and laughing all at once. "You did it!" she gasped. "Hattie, you won!" And Hattie for once said nothing, just dropped to her knees in the dirt, laughing until the tears came. Weeks later, before leaving for the state capitol, she stood again on that same porch. Her trunk was packed, her coat buttoned, her hair braided. Cade wrapped his arms around her from behind. Scared, he asked. No, she said honestly. But I'm sad. He kissed her temple. Why? Because I finally love it here, she whispered. And now I have to go. He turned her gently. You'll come back. I don't know, she said, but he smiled. Then I'll follow. She stepped into the carriage, waved once, and disappeared over the hill. Cade stood on the porch long after the dust had settled. In the quiet, he whispered, I married her as a joke. Then he laughed once, deep and low. But damn if the joke wasn't on me.